6 things you need to know when you're going through a crisis. They can be found right in the book of John in the story of Lazarus. So, let me share them with you. Chapter 11, the book of John, verse 1. I'm reading out of the New Living Translation, just so you know. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, Lord, your dear friend is very sick. And my first point is found in verse 3. So the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, Lord, your dear friend is very sick. Point number 1 for us in our own lives, invite Jesus into your crisis, right? Invite Jesus into your crisis. Just because we're believers, just because you're a believer, a Christian, it doesn't necessarily mean you invited Jesus into your crisis. Inviting him into your crisis means that you are actively seeking him throughout your crisis, right? You're letting him know, Lord, this is what's going on, even though, of course, God already knows what's going on. But you are, by inviting him into your crisis, you're letting God know that I want you to lead me in this. And not only do I want you to lead me in this, I want you to show me how you want to grow me through this crisis, right? I remember years ago, when I was still a new believer, I used to listen to Charles Stanley a lot. And one of the things he taught was that when you're entering into a trial, when you're in a trial of any kind in your life, one of the first things you want to ask God is, what do you want to teach me in this? How do you want to grow me in this, right? I know for me, in my own personal life, when my mother was diagnosed with cancer many years ago, it was really tough. But that's one of the first things I asked, Lord, how do you want to grow me in this? How do you want to grow me in this? How do I deal with this, right? And I invited him into this crisis to lead me through it, right? So that's one of the first things you want to do, is invite Jesus into your crisis. So let's keep going. Verse number 5. But when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this. Right? So point number 2 is found right there. Know that God has a purpose and a plan for you in this crisis. He has a purpose and a plan for you in this crisis. In this particular situation, God had a plan for Lazarus, right? He knew the bigger plan. He knew that Lazarus was going to die, and that he was going to come back, go to where they lived, and he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Now, of course, Mary and Martha didn't know God's ultimate plan here, just like we don't know God's plan. We don't always know God's plan. He very seldom reveals his full plan to us, right? But know that he has a plan and a purpose. And when you know that he has a plan and a purpose in a crisis, it helps us in so many ways, so that we're not surrendering to fear. We're not surrendering to panic, right? So even with this situation we're in with this global pandemic, know that God has a plan. He has an overall plan for you specifically in this. And I don't know what God's plan is for you specifically, but you can seek him out and ask him, Lord, what do you want me to learn in this crisis, right? I know for me, when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, 2 of the things I felt like God was saying to me was that I need you to trust me more, learn how to trust me. It was the first really crisis that I had experienced as a fairly new believer at that time. And he was saying, you need to trust me more. And another thing was for me to learn to let go of control, because I wanted to control. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to, I wanted my mother to go to the doctors I wanted her to go to. I wanted to fix it. But yet we were 3,000 miles away. She lived in New Jersey. I lived in California. My parents were there. I was here. I couldn't control it like I wanted to, right? Another thing, before my mother was diagnosed with cancer, I had signed up to do a 3-week mission trip overseas in the Middle East. Well, once she was diagnosed with cancer, I was kind of like, I don't know that I want to go on this mission trip now. I don't know that I can go now. My mother's sick. What if something happens to her while I'm, in Egypt, or, one of the three countries that we would be in? But I sensed God saying to me at the time, no, you need to go. You need to go. Stick with your commitment. Do what I've called you to do. And so I was able to do that. So yeah, know that God has a purpose and a plan for you in this crisis. He has a bigger plan that only He knows, but He will reveal what He wants you to do in the crisis, how He wants to grow you in the crisis, right? So that's important for you to know. Okay. Verse 5. So although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, He stayed where He was for the next 2 days. He stayed where He was for the next 2 days. Interesting, right? He didn't rush back. Even though He loved them dearly, He didn't rush back to heal Lazarus because He knew He had a bigger plan. He knew that the plan was to let Lazarus die. Now, of course, Mary and Martha didn't know that, but the bigger plan was that He was going to go back and heal him. So my next point number 3, is know that God has a particular timing. Know that God has a particular timing in this crisis, right? And we know that God's timing and our timing, it's never the same, right? When we enter into a crisis, the first thing we want to do is we want out of the crisis. We want to pray it away, right? But God has a particular timing in mind. And in the way that He's working in you, there's a particular timing. So that's why it's so important for us to seek God and asking Him, Lord, how do you want to grow me in this crisis? Because God wants to grow us in a particular way during this time, and He does have a particular timing in the crisis. So in this situation, Mary and Martha were praying for their brother they were hoping their brother would be healed, that Jesus would come back while he was still alive, yet sick, so that He could heal him. But no, Jesus had a particular timing in mind, and He was going to go back after Lazarus had died. Verse 7. Finally, Jesus said to His disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." But His disciples objected. "Rabbi," they said, "only a few days ago the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again?" And that's my next point. Know that external forces will attempt to shake you off of God's peace, right? Know that external forces will try to shake God's peace within you. Now, in this situation, of course, the disciples weren't trying to shake Jesus's peace or anything like that, or trying to thwart His plan. They didn't know the bigger plan, but all they knew was that they were fearful. You go back there, they're going to stone you, and us too, right? They were afraid. So in this particular instance, Jesus did not allow the disciples' fear to shake His plan. He didn't allow their fear to shake His peace, right? And so likewise with us, it's up to us to guard our peace. We need to set boundaries around us, and we need to know what we can allow in and what we cannot allow in, right? In this pandemic situation, with so much news about it, it's good to inform ourselves and know what we need to know. But if we're listening to it 24 hours a day, every day, you're not going to have peace, right? And we know that that our peace comes from Christ, right? He is our peace. It doesn't matter what crisis you're in, you can still experience peace, but it's up to us to guard that peace, right? To be guarded. I'm going to skip down to verse 17 and read there. Verse 17. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, He was told that Lazarus had already been in his grave for 4 days. And I'm going to come back there in a minute, but I'm going to keep going. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Mary and Martha in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet Him. But Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been there, my brother would not have died. If only you had been there, my brother would not have died. And that's my next point. It's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be disappointed. I love that Martha expressed her disappointment to Jesus. I loved her openness and her authenticity here. She let him know, I'm disappointed, Jesus, that you didn't come back in time to heal my brother. How powerful is that, right? We can be so honest with God, right? And this is such an example of that, that she had that intimacy with Christ. They were an intimate family with Jesus. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, they were close to Jesus. And I love how she felt so comfortable that she could be honest with him. And actually, Mary said the same thing to him down in verse 32. Lord, if only you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. So they were very comfortable in letting their Lord know that I'm disappointed. And so know that it's okay to be disappointed, saddened, right? Right now, what we're going through is a sad thing, right? A lot of people are dying. The medical field, not just here in this our country, but in Italy and in China and other countries, people are going through it. I don't know if you know anyone who has dealt with this illness, the virus, has passed away from it, but it's a sad thing, and it's okay to be disappointed. Whatever you're going through, however it's affecting you, it's okay to be disappointed. I remember when my mother passed away, and yes, she did pass away from cancer those many years ago. After a year and some months, she passed away. And I remember feeling like it wasn't okay to be sad. I was still a fairly new believer, still learning and growing. And there was a part of me that felt like, because sometimes people would say, well, she's with the Lord now. At least she's with the Lord. It was almost like they didn't want me to have the sadness, right? And so I felt a little bit stuck in a quandary, right? If that's a word, I think that's a word. Just kind of like, well, sadness or joy, right? But it's okay to be disappointed. It's okay. God understands our disappointment. The only thing is, you don't want to live in disappointment. You don't want to make your home there, right? You don't want to stay there forever. So you just like Martha and Mary did, they shared with Christ their disappointment, but you ask God to walk you through the disappointment, right? And so, it's okay to be disappointed. And let me move on to my next point and go back to verse 17. Verse 17 says, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had been in his grave for 4 days. And this is my next point. Embrace where God has you right now. And with Mary and Martha, they sent for Jesus to come and heal their brother while he was alive but sick, right? Jesus didn't do that. He waited until Lazarus was dead, right? But in verse 17, it says that when Jesus got back there, Lazarus had been in the grave for 4 days. Mary and Martha embraced where they were when their brother was alive and sick. They were hoping that Christ would come back and heal their brother. But when he died, they buried him. They didn't leave him in the house. They buried him because he had passed away, right? So for us, our takeaway is embrace where God has us right now. If we, with all these changes going on, right? We have to wear a mask and we have to do this and we have to do that. Just embrace where we are right now. If you're boxing back and I don't want to do this and oh my goodness and this and that, if we're griping and complaining about where God has us, it really is, it's only going to make it worse. And we really can't grow when we're fighting against where God has us, right? It just doesn't help. So embrace where God has you right now. If you have to wear a mask, wear a mask. Stand 6 feet apart, whatever. All the things to, number one, protect you and others from the virus, the physical aspect of the crisis. But then the spiritual aspect is embrace where God has you right now so he can continue to grow you where you are right now. Okay? And those are the 6 points that I wanted to make. But there's a final verse I want to read that could actually turn into a seventh point that I don't have written down on my cards. But in verse 22, after Martha tells Jesus how disappointed she is that he wasn't there, she goes on to say, "But even now, Lord, I know that God will give you whatever you ask." I love that. I love that she still has hope. Even though she's disappointed, her brother has died. The hope of Christ is still living on within her. She still has no idea that Jesus is going to raise her brother from the dead. She doesn't know that. But but to say, even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask, powerful, powerful. We need to be mindful of that in our own lives. Doesn't matter what we see. Know that the impossible is possible with God. Be blessed and continue to seek after God in this crisis.